Chapter 16. The End of a Voyage. In Washington, on a blustery evening in March 1841, in a long narrow room over a barber shop, 8 men sat around a table. They were the justices of the Supreme Court, meeting together to decide and give a ruling on the case of the Amistad. Justice Story of Massachusetts had been chosen to write the decision. After the other judges had heard Story's decision, they would add their names to his if they agreed. If they did not, they would dissent. The decision agreed on by the majority would stand as the ruling of the court. Once agreed on, the decree would be handed down from the bench in open court, with the 8 judges soberly robed in black robes. But tonight, they were meeting without ceremony to try to get the business over. It had already gone on too long. The court calendar had been crowded with cases. The, quote, October term of the court had lasted through the fall and winter. The new year had come in and a new president had entered the White House. The inauguration ceremonies had broken into the work of the court. There had been special duties to perform. Chief Justice Taney had been called on to hear President Harrison, old, quote, Tippecanoe, take his oath of office. There had been balls and parties to attend. A whole week of March had been taken up with the inauguration of Harrison and Tyler, while the fate of the Amistad captives remained undecided. Earlier, while the trial was in progress, there had been another delay caused by the death of one of the judges. There should have been 9 men sitting around the table tonight, but Justice Barbour of Virginia had died during the week that John Quincy Adams was arguing before the court. The trial had been put off for a week. Then Mr. Adams had taken up his argument again before the 8 remaining judges. Now the long arguments for both sides were finished. The justices had read and examined the evidence. They were familiar with the facts, but they listened carefully while Justice Story restated them. Justice Story read in his dry voice, reviewing the claims of Lieutenant Gedney, who had taken possession of the vessel, and of the Negroes who had gone on shore. He read the demand of Ruiz and Montes of the Spanish ambassador that the ship and its cargo should be restored according to treaty. He outlined the answer of the Negroes. 1 hour passed, and then another before Justice Story came to the main points which would be necessary to decide. Quote, the only point is whether these Negroes are the property of Ruiz and Montes and ought to be delivered up. Up to this point, his listeners had heard nothing new. Justice Story was coming now to his own decision. The other 7 judges stirred and leaned forward in their chairs. It is plain, Justice Story said, that these Negroes were never the lawful slaves of Ruiz or Montes or of any other Spanish subjects. By the laws of Spain, the African slave trade is abolished. The dealing in that trade is deemed a crime. They cannot be deemed pirates in the sense of the treaty. The justice then went on to give his opinion that the passports offered as evidence of ownership had been obtained by fraud. In the treaties between nations, it can never be presumed that either state intends to protect fraud. When the Amistad arrived, she was in possession of the Negroes asserting their freedom. In no sense could they intend to import themselves as slaves. Therefore, it is our opinion that the said Negroes be declared to be free. When Justice Story finished reading, his eyes fastened themselves on Chief Justice Taney. Would he agree? Would the opinion stand? Taney had only 1 vote, of course, but his word would have great weight. Taney, like the majority of the men at the table, came from a part of the country where slavery was the law and the custom. He believed there was no wrong in slavery. I am in agreement, Taney asserted without hesitation. 5 other men nodded. Only Baldwin of Pennsylvania dissented. 7-1, a clear majority. The fate of the Amistad captives was decided. The men stood up and stretched tired muscles wearily. The last case on the court calendar was closed. The quote October term at last could come to an end. The April sun beat heavily on the tropical waters and on the white-sailed brig, the Buzzard, but the passengers abroad did not mind the heat of the sun at the equator. For most of them, it meant that they were nearing home. An omen, Cinque had called it, that the news from Washington reached the prison at the same time the Buzzard was set to sail to Africa. James Covey had spent his shore leave in New Haven and was about to return to his ship when the word of the Supreme Court decree arrived. It was he who had suggested that Captain Fitzgerald's brig could provide transport to the returning Africans. A church mission had already engaged passage, Captain Fitzgerald said, but he didn't mind crowding his ship a bit for the honor of carrying the Amistad captives home. He claimed part of the credit for their freedom anyway. If he had not let his seaman, James Covey, go to New Haven to act as interpreter, Americans might never have known the Amistad story. It had been a good voyage. After only 4 weeks out, they were already nearing the tropical coastal waters of Africa. Callie stood by the rail watching Covey take a reef in the topsail. The seaman laughed at the sight of Pugna climbing the rigging up to the lookout. "Can't keep that one off the ropes," he said. "He's going to make a sailor." A sailor. Callie's heart missed a beat. As the voyage neared its end, he had blown hot and cold about his decision to return home. When he had told Enoch Hopkins that he was leaving with the others, Enoch had said moodily, "I knew that night on the pond. If Indian summer on our farm couldn't win you, nothing else would have a chance." As a matter of fact, Callie had been very close to staying in America until Cinque gave him the file that had brought their freedom. To remember by, Cinque had said. That file, Callie knew, must be taken home to the village. Then, when Graham Ellis decided to make the voyage with them to America to set up a school in the church mission, Callie had no more doubts about his choice. He wanted to go home, surely, but afterward, beyond this year, beyond the next? Callie chuckled. He was thinking like an American. In his village at home, boys did not plan years ahead. They did not consider a future different from that of their fathers or grandfathers. In a way of life set by long tradition, the future took care of itself without special planning. You grew to manhood and married. You farmed, like Cinque, or raised cattle, or worked on iron or wood, like Grabu or Fulway. When you were old, you joined the wise men under the palaver tree, where things happened always in the same way. There was no need to consider your role in the years ahead. The Americans had a different way. They did one thing and then another. They tried to know many different kinds of life in many places. "How do you get to be a sailor?" Callie asked James Covey next time he saw him. "You just sign up," Covey said. "Getting on the roll is easy. Not so easy to quit the sea. Even if the work below decks is hard, it kind of gets in your blood. Are you thinking of signing? I thought all of you folks were longing to get back to your homes." To the Negro seaman, it had meant more than he could say to have had a share in the struggle for the freedom of these Africans, had waged. Not he alone, but all Negroes everywhere who had been torn from their homes by white invaders had had their spirits uplifted by the triumph of the Amistad captives. "It's a great thing you've accomplished getting back," Covey said in a low, serious tone. "I know," Callie responded, "but the world is big. I want to see all of it. Not right away, but in the future. To go home, to tell all the happenings, to have Marga's parents come, perhaps to bargain for a wedding. but someday, before he was an old man, to handle ropes and sail at sea. A great clamor woke Callie out of his daydream. "Land ho!" the lookout shouted. From the deck on which he was standing, the coast seemed no more than a dark line drawn against the sky with a pen. Margaret came to stand beside the rail. She did not speak, but just stood there, straining her eyes to see the shore. Presently she pulled Callie's sleeves and whispered, "Look!" She pointed to the helm. Cinque was at the wheel. He was guiding the ship with Captain Fitzgerald standing beside him. Graham Ellis came up with one of the ladies of the mission. "Did you see Cinque at the helm?" the lady asked. Mr. Ellis suggested it, and Captain Fitzgerald thought it very fitting. Callie nodded. He could not trust himself to speak. To see Cinque with his hand on the wheel brought back the long, fruitless days on the black schooner, the Amistad. The days of toilsome journeying that were so cruelly undone in the night. Yet the toil, the hunger and thirst, the sickness, the dying had not been in vain. The faint, pencil-marked strip of land became a definite shoreline with earth and palm trees. Ahead lay the Lomboko harbor. Cinque had brought the voyagers home.